All right, let's make a start then. So, hello, fellow Patreon members. Welcome to the live demo introducing, running through our November 2021 project and continuing our round the world trip, our virtual round the world trip. We were in Morocco last month. We're now coming into Europe, or sort of a little bit of Asia, a little bit of Europe. This is Istanbul and the Golden Horn. I don't know whether any of you have been there, but a beautiful city. And this is the Golden Horn on the European side. And we're looking towards the, if I can pronounce it right, the Süleymaniye Mosque with the minarets there. It's a classic contre-jour, this one. We're painting into the light. This is a photograph I took probably nearly 10 years ago. There's a foreground here. I think now this foreground, there's like a little shoreline here. I think this foreground now is quite a smart pedestrian promenade with a cycle path. So it's not like it is in this photograph with a cafe here on the left-hand side. But a classic contre-jour. I think it works really well for watercolor with the silhouetted shapes of the buildings in the distance on the far shore. The mosque, tricky doing that dome, tricky getting those minarets right as well. Then the light hitting these rooftops. We can see some ferry boats as well on the far shore. There's a ferry station here. All right, so these ferries actually they're quite low because they've got to go under. There's a bridge that way. There's a bridge that way, so they got to snuck under the bridge. Oh, by the way, you do have the source photo button. Those Patreon members on Crowdcast, you've got the green source photo button. It was in the posting as well. Hopefully you had a chance to download it and cogitate over it and think how you might do it. And then this water coming towards us, the Golden Horn, and the shimmering light. How are we going to do this in watercolor? I can see there's been quite a few suggestions already, some really good suggestions, which I'll let you know my particular option for doing this. So Sandra said, I imagine dry brush, letting a lot of white of the paper show through. Jensen, dry brush is better on rough texture paper. Yes, I agree. Mike, frosted transparent tape to mask the figures, then clear wax crayon and light. That's a good one, Mike. Gwen, dry brush on rough paper. Daniel, I would either leave the white paper or later enhance it with white paint from the tube. Lynn, she's got a couple of lemons and brushes. There's a lemons and brush. There's a large lemons and brush, but a nice soft brush would be good for that. But yes, so how are we going to do this shimmering light, that bright light coming through? More on that shortly. Let me go through my materials with you and the interface that we've got here with Crowdcast. So you've seen the chat. Your microphone is on mute, so you can hear me, I can't hear you. And if you've got a question, please type that into the Ask a Question button, probably down the bottom of your screen, whatever device you're watching on this Crowdcast system. Pop your question in there. There will be some nice breaks along the way. Now, you can paint along with me. I know on these sessions, some people just wait. They just watch me paint, and then they paint in their own time. Other people might paint along with me. And then submit that for the critique if you're on the relevant tier for the critique. More on that on a posting I'll put on Patreon about how to submit your paintings if you're fairly new to the Patreon club. Or you may paint now and paint again later on. May do two. Up to you. So good luck for those that are going to paint along with me. And I'll try and go a fairly slowish pace, just so that if you are painting along with me, we'll all go the same speed. Right. Anything else on the interface? So we've got the ask a question button. We've got the source photo as well. You've got the chat there. The crowdcast system, when we finish this demo, just leave it for a few seconds, and then the crowdcast system will prepare. We'll just process the recording so you can play it back as many times as you want to, and I'll most likely put it up on YouTube as well, for a private viewing or sorry, accessing as well, ad free for Patreon members. Right, materials. I'm using Saunders for this demo, my normal paper. I know there's lots of other really good brands, but cotton-based paper. It's going to stay wet quite long. Tape down, as you can see. Paint-wise, I'll describe the colors as I go through, but I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. There's a lavender there, 3 mixing wells. My water container, you can just about see the silver side of the aluminium side of the container. It's over there. And there's a sponge down to my bottom right. I find this sort of setup maximizes the screen area so you can see what's going on here. Brush-wise, I'll be using a mop brush. It could be a natural brush or a synthetic mop brush. This is a Raphael one, and then an assortment of synthetic round brushes, many brands available. This one's a Jackman's Art one, and this one's a WH Smith one. And I think that's pretty much it on the brush side. So the big question, how to do this shimmering water, the light hitting the water. I think there's 3 main ways. Mike actually hit on a 4th one that I hadn't actually considered. The first option would be to use a dry, if you've got rough paper, to use a fairly dry brush and then a soft brush with a large big mop brush, with not very much paint on the brush. And it takes a bit of practice, but so from the left hand side here, doing a horizontal stroke like that, and as you come towards the middle, your brush is running out of paint, and you get the paper showing through that sort of deckled look, and then maybe repeating it on the right hand side if you wanted a little bit of water to show, and then it comes into the shimmering light. So doing that from the top, coming down, maybe a little bit more water as you come down towards the foreground. Option 2 is that you mask it out. You use masking fluid. Is it called gasket fluid or gasket, something or other elsewhere? But in the UK, we call it masking fluid. That sort of rubbery stuff that you could put on before, and that would work actually quite well. I've never got on with it myself, to be honest with you. So I won't be doing that method. I've chosen a way that I think might be quite simple or simpler for most people to follow, on the basis that you may not have much practice of that dry brush stroke. You could do it with a brush like that, or the old, that's a really soft Lebanson brush, or possibly a flat brush or a Hake brush. That would work as well, doing that sort of motion. I'm going to choose what I think might be the easier option, in that study this light area carefully. Zoom in. If you've got the image on your PC or device, zoom in, and you'll see appearing subtle shapes, mainly round shapes, curved shapes of the light. There are some more geometrical shapes. if I can spot one for you, like in here, there's like a triangle there. So just take time to observe the different shapes. And I'm going to actually paint the sea in, and then paint around these main light areas. So there's a band there. There's a little bit of sea appearing, all right, with some gaps here and there, and then another batch of light reflection, light shimmering, and then a little bit more as we come down towards the foreground. I'm not going to do the foreground. It's up to you if you want to do the foreground. I'm going to keep it nice and simple. Sky, buildings, ferry boats, water, shimmering water. I've got a little plan here just to help you. This might help you. This is what I've actually drawn this out, but this is what I'm thinking mentally, my sequence of my process, my sequence of approaching this. So here's the shoreline here, all right? And the numbers represent the sequence of me painting. So number 1 will be the sky, number 2 will be the water, doing that painting around these larger white areas. I will use, for me, I'm going to use a little bit of white paint for some of the, around the perimeter, these little white marks here. Unless by accident, I expose some of the paper as I'm doing my wash, that might appear, I will leave them. I might need to soften some of the edges as well. They're not very hard edges, so I might need to use a little soft synthetic brush just to make a little bit of a soft edge to those circular marks. There's some lovely marks here. They're almost like bright lights, like car lights flashing in front of us. Very, very intense light. So let's see if we can replicate that. It would be better if I've got very bright white paper. I don't. I've got the Saunders slightly off-white paper, all right? Not ideal, but we'll see how we get on. I mean, half the enjoyment is actually doing the painting, not necessarily the end result. So, number 2, the water. Number 3, the darks. So, doing the background buildings, paying particular attention to the dome, the minarets, and then exposing little bits of light. Little bits of light. Just observe this. Don't look at the individual buildings. Again, if you zoom in, you will be able to see the buildings. There's looks like a sort of municipal building here. We've got the lovely mosque with lots of domes and some central columns, more light hitting a building over that side. There's, on the right-hand side here, there's the back end of a ferry boat going, I guess, going that way. There is also a parasol on the left-hand side here from the cafe, but ignore those. Just concentrate on this lovely background. Also, the covered market, the Kapalı Çarşı market, is somewhere over here. The famous covered market in Istanbul. I mean, this is a very well-known tourist area here. When it's in the summer, when it's busy, and then there's thousands of people there, teeming all over the place, as well as the locals. And there's lots of fishermen as well. The bridge down this side, the main bridge, there's hundreds of fishermen there every day, fishing off the side and the lower levels as well. Right, number 4 will be the ferry boats. This is a ferry station. Maybe we just want to pay a little bit of homage to the area, and very simple ferry boats. If you look at them, they're almost like a rectangle. Think of them like a rectangle with a little bit of a slant for the front, maybe a vertical back, but they're just bands of light and dark. So, you know, this one, for example, we've got light, dark, light, dark, light, then the water line, and that's it. Fairly simple. And well, that one's actually got a slightly slanted back to it. There's the front there. A little bit of a step up to those upper levels. Quite simple ferry boats. So we want to try and get a feeling for this busy ferry port. Right, so let me just check and see. It looks like there's a question already before I start. Hang on a second. Let me just read out this question. Lynn, yes, the smaller Lebanese brush works very well. There are some smaller ones. Do I have one here? Not that small, Lynn. You see these lovely bamboo handles as well. But there's a range, and there's about 20 or 30 Lebanese brushes in the range. Thanks very much, Lynn, for that. Are there any other questions? I'll just check that everyone can hear me still. If someone pops into chat that you can hear me okay, that would be great. Before I continue. Okay. Thank you, Sue. I think it's Sue. Thank you, Sue. Yeah, okay. Right. Thanks, Gary. Well, the hardest thing for me is knowing where to start. Let me just get back to the reference photo. So just to recap, I'm not going to do the foreground. I'm going to keep it simple. It's up to you if you want to do the foreground, the figures here, a fisherman, quite nice with having that fishing rod angling into the scene. This large guy here, I think he's had too many doner kebabs or something like that. That lovely street food in Istanbul. But it's up to you if you have the figures and the tables there. I don't think the tables are particularly well placed for this. All these shapes down in the bottom left hand corner. Maybe some figures, maybe the shoreline, possibly, entirely up to you. You interpret this as you want to. I'm trying to keep things fairly simple with my composition. And also, going back to the composition, let me just describe that. The balance of the mosque, the shimmering water, and these ferry boats. So trying to have a balance of those, not everything all on one side. All right, a sort of harmonious balance between it. Maybe we could have another minaret up there. We can move things around if we want to, just to suit the balance of the composition. The most important thing I think to get right is the shoreline on the far side. And on the basis that most of the action is going to be the distant buildings and the minarets, I want to make sure there's enough space for those minarets, particularly the high one here. In my photograph, the shoreline is just I guess it's just around about the halfway line. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit below the halfway line. That's my line of thinking. Very important decision to make, that where the horizon, where that waterline is going to be. So maybe around about here. So I'm visually trying to see my finished composition on the page. So as carefully as I can, a horizontal line. Now, hopefully this will appear, my pencil line will appear your end. I'm going to go fairly soft first of all. And all these boats, they're all level. Well, this one's a little bit lower because it's closer to us. But generally speaking, that is a horizontal line. And not completely straight. There's little bits of waves. There's choppy water here, busy waterway. So just a dotted line for me, a dotted line just to indicate the far shore. And hopefully that's fairly horizontal. Does it look fairly horizontal? I think it's all right. Now, the next difficult thing, the rooftops, the skyline of the buildings on the far side. Again, I'm going to do it fairly soft first of all. We want the mosque around about on that third there. I think that would be a good, let's go with this white paint. On that third there would be about right for me. So the mosque rises up and we have the main dome a very important dome to get right. Something like that. Try and get it symmetrical, and it sort of steps down like that. The minarets, there's a couple of minarets immediately to the right of the main dome, and sort of, I'm just going to draw a straight vertical line for the first one. And then the second one, a little bit higher, parallel to it, of course, like that. There are two other minarets, a little bit lower on the right-hand side. I've put something in pencil there. Let me just erase that out. So we've got a clean sky. So this mosque, the Süleymaniye Mosque, I need to get absolutely right and symmetrical as well. So there are some side domes like that. There we go. I'm not going to draw in all of the rooftops. I'm going to just really freely express those as I go in with my stage 3, okay? If you want to, you could, of course, draw in some of the main buildings that you want to include. There's a nice triangular roof down here, okay? There's some buildings over here. There's a triangle of a roof there. Placing those lighter areas could also help with the composition, the balance of the scene as well. Now, my ferry boats. So the ferry station is around about here. Perhaps there's a back end of a ferry boat there. Let's have one ferry boat. Going out like that. And maybe another one over here, as we've got in the photograph. Again, just think of it almost like a rectangle with some slopey ends to it. There we are. And there's lots of light over here and vehicles on the quay side and all sorts going on. The lighter areas, I'm not going to draw in the actual shimmering water here. All right. I'm just going to really try as best I can to paint around these lighter areas. But in my mind, I'm imagining it almost like an upside down triangle with the sort of top edge there, and then something like that in there, a rough triangle, a rough triangular shape. That really is it from a drawing point of view. Quite simple, but importantly, getting right in my own mind, the shoreline, getting right, the dome, just double checking that, saying that, and the little spike on the top. Getting right the minarets as well. I'm just going to draw a thin line for those. And the boats, just a few boats. There's a myriad of boats in the scene, loads of them, and some smaller craft as well in there, smaller ferry boats. But we'll just have those main shapes of a few boats just to show that it's a busy ferry station. Okay, are there any questions at all? Let me just check. So, Laurie, you didn't mention the ground in the front. Will that be included as well? So Laurie is questioning the ground in the front. No, I'm not going to do the ground, okay? I'm just imagining maybe we're standing a little bit closer to the shoreline, and I'm keeping it dead simple. with the focal point being the mosque, the Süleymaniye Mosque, and this shimmering water in front of it. So keeping it fairly smooth. There's nothing stopping you putting in the foreground. If you do put in the foreground, I would say maybe consider a gentle slope for it. And so bottom left to top right, or top left to bottom right, something like that. I wouldn't have it horizontal. It's just not going to look right. Having there's too many horizontals anyway, and having another horizontal thing there, I think it'd be nice having a little bit of a slant to it. Would work well, Laurie, if you want to do that. Okay, now I'm going to pre-wet the paper. I don't often do this, but I do want a smooth. I'm going to pre-wet the paper for two reasons. I want a smooth wash for the sky. Clear sky, no clouds, clear wash. And also dampening the paper might help me with the application of painting in the sea. Having just a little bit of residual dampness, just a little bit of wetness on the paper, not too wet, I think will help me apply that sea from top to bottom in a fairly smooth way. So to wet the paper, you could use a sponge. I'm going to use a flat brush. It would help if it was a clean. It would help if it was a clean brush. I think that's a clean brush. And just pick up some clear water to my right and apply that over the scene. Make sure I cover the whole paper, including all that white stuff that we're going to carefully paint around, and up to the sky. So I've just started at the bottom because that will dry first. I want the sky to be fairly damp when I start that first. So let's make this just a little bit damper than the sea, the golden horn. And I'm now looking at the paper against the light and just checking how well. You can see there's a little bit of shine here with the reflection of the lights on the camera. That will obviously go away as the paper dries. Let's just, you could use a sponge for this, a soft sponge. And if there's too much water on the paper, you could lift it off with a soft sponge. Let that soak in a little bit there. And I want to paint the sky when it's fairly moist and paint the water when it's a little bit drier. So if I could describe that as the damp stage, or between damp and dry, if there's a halfway point between those two. And for the sky, I'm going to apply a little, I detect a little bit of yellow ochre on the distant horizon. So I'm going to lay in that first and then drop down a bit of light blue on top of that with a soft mop brush. Okay. I'll just let this paint dry on the water just a little bit. In fact, I'll just use a brush just to make it a little bit drier, so as I'm not holding you up. I don't want to use a hairdryer here to speed up any drying. It would just make it too dry and might warm the paper. The paper might be too warm, and then anything I apply will just dry so quickly. Okay, so sky wet, not so wet. Right. First of all then, the application of that yellow ochre band, picking up my soft mop brush and just apply that band across the middle there of that background, across the horizon. Something like that. And then wash that brush off, same brush, pick up some, excuse me while I just adjust my microphone, pick up some cerulean blue, a little bit of cobalt. It's my classic sky mix. Now, you don't need to be too wet with the brush here because the paper's quite wet anyway, so not too much paint on the brush, and then apply that over the top. Apply that over the top. Might be just a little bit more intense on the left-hand side. And just let that sink down into the yellow ochre, just a little bit. Now, the buildings here, and there's my skyline of the buildings. I'm just going to cover that with some warm red. So a lot of the rooftops are red, and that is going to be the color of the finished rooftop. So, and we're going to paint negatively around those for the darker shadows. So I can just pick up anything really, that sort of light red, a bit of cadmium red, something like that. It will dry lighter. So I can go a little bit over the boats. Just a little bit like that. There's some red roofs over on the left-hand side as well. And that will be fine. So just let that dry. Now, this sea, I'm just touching the paper here just to make sure it's still a little bit damp. Let's start with the sea, left-hand side, mix a sea color, which is going to be a little bit, let's try a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of burnt sienna. Cobalt blue, burnt sienna. And maybe a little bit light in the distance. But as we come, let's add a bit more water into this mixing well. As we come to the foreground, maybe we can get a little bit more intense with that color. So cobalt blue, tiny bit of burnt sienna. And then check my brush and just start. Doesn't need to be too exact here, but as we come towards the middle, we've got to make a mental note to leave exposed some of this white area. Now I'm holding the brush at a slight angle just to help me create some of these negative shapes. There's a sort of white trail below a boat there. A little bit lighter as we come into the middle, and there's just a few little bits of blue showing through, and it's quite light there, and then we go a little bit darker again over on the right hand side. So that's that far side. Now we're just going to basically come down, and with the water, with the paint being still quite damp, I'm not going to get any nasty edges. Just think about the angle of my brush. That's sort of almost a 45-degree angle. So just painting around the main lighter areas. Just lightly touching the paper, creating these shapes. There we are. It's going to get a bit easier as we come down, once you get the swing of things, and it will be a little bit more solid, the water surface, as we come down. So here's this bigger expanse of white in the middle. Not many white bits on the left-hand side. It's quite solid, and then just around this area here, these little light areas appear. So we're not going to get in all of the smaller bits of light. We can use a bit of white paint for that. Keep going, and hopefully that paper will stay just the right amount of dampness for you. I've got a slight slope on my board. Well, there's a bit of light there. Going to be fairly random with this with these white marks. Don't make them too symmetrical. Let's go a little bit darker as we come down towards the bottom. There's that. If you did want to do a little bit of dry brush, that's the sort of effect you can get. But my paper is cold press. It's not the ultra rough paper, so it's not ideal for getting those white marks appearing. Let's, oops, no ultramarine blue. Let's just now come over the right hand side here. So I can be a little bit more bold with the strokes now. And I've got just enough paint to close up that, continue down to the bottom right corner. Now, while that's drying, I could pick up a smaller brush and just add in just a few more little tiny lines as I see them in the distance. Just eke out a bit more of that blue there. Just little bits. We've got the sea just below this boat here. And then there's just a few little blobs. As I say, you've got to keep looking at the photo just to get a little bit of guidance and inspiration where those marks are. That's the quay side there, up to that boat. There we are. And we've got a bit of a bead forming down here. Let's just mop that up a little bit. Take my sponge. Now, some of these shapes here, we can make them a little bit softer by with a synthetic brush, just maybe now and again, just adding in a bit of a soft line into some of these, so it's not so harsh. Break up this area a little bit. Let's just have a few more. Fine lines within that gap. There we go. On the left-hand side there, let's just have a few more over there. As this dries a little bit, I can also then add in some of these darker waves, but I need to let this dry a bit. Okay, so when that gets to the damp stage or almost dry, I can then, maybe with a brush like this, just add in a few of those darker wave marks in the water. So I'm just going to let this dry a bit, not going to muck about with it. Not muck about with it too much. You don't want to overwork it. As I say, when this is totally dry, we will add in some of the little lighter, whiter bits just to make it a bit more shimmering. So there, let that dry a bit. And there's some subtle variations in the sea. We can see a little bit of the browns coming through. I mean, this is a busy waterway, so it's not going to be a tropical blue sea. There's going to be maybe a little bit of debris in it and a small little bit of pollution and, dare I say it, oil slicks on the top and things like that. But I think that's all right so far. I want to keep that area here. That's most of the light is there. There we go. So it's sort of starting to take shape now. There's still a lot of moisture in this paper. I can't go in with the dark waves yet, although this bottom right-hand corner, I'm looking at the paper against the light, and if it's losing that shine, then it's about right where I can go in with this sort of brush with darker, thicker paint to get in those darker wave marks, as we can see, in very thin lines in the distance, but thicker marks. Maybe I could use a bigger brush as we come down to the foreground. Let me just mop up that there. Bit too much paint there, just mop it up. Good. Okay, so I think there's a couple of questions just while I'm letting mine dry. Let me just answer those questions. Joy, how often do you need to replace your mop brushes to keep a good edge? Well, maybe once a year, I would say. Of course, you can visually look at them. They're going to lose their point, first of all, and then gradually you're not able to create a nice edge to them. Now, this brush here is probably about 1.5 years old, and I use this fairly regularly, quite a few times a week. So, it's been used 250, 300 times, I guess. And it's all right. It does. In honesty, if I just twist that brush, it's lost its point, but I can still get a good edge with it. All right, you see that sharp edge there? So that's quite a good edge. If I want to paint around things, or I want to use a flat edge to do some horizontal or vertical marks, that's still all right. But if truth were known, I could dig deep in my pocket and buy another brush like that. Obviously, the synthetic brushes will last longer. Brushes like this will last an awful lot longer than the natural brushes. But then the natural brush are going to be softer. So thanks, Joy. John D, how about splattering a bit of masking fluid for the sparkles? Good idea, John. I'm sorry, it's an area I've got no expertise in because I hate the stuff. I've never, as a teenager, I used to use it regularly, but never got on with it. I just end up with an absolute total mess. And I just said to myself, I'm never going to use that stuff again. So sorry, John, I can't provide any words of guidance there. Let me just add a bit more. Just a little bit of, I just need to take the sea up to the bottom of this ferry boat, that ferry boat there. Just spotted that. Right, mine's still not dry yet. Oh, thank you, John, for that question. Are there any more questions at all? Anyone? No, I don't think so. So just a recap so far: sky, damp paper, smooth wash, Hopefully we got that. Depending on the paint you use, you may get a little bit of granulation. I've got a bit of granulation happening, but it doesn't matter. The main thing is we don't want any lines appearing there. We want a smooth, flat wash and a little bit of a hint of that yellow appearing in the distant horizon, and a smooth transition from that blue to the yellow. And if you paint it the way I did it, the yellow first, then the blue, it's not going to go green. All right. If you don't, it probably would go green if you started mixing around a lot. But generally it's going to be well behaved and stick to that gradual change, that gradual transformation of the blue to the yellow. And then a little bit of red in here. Some of this red will be some exposed rooftops catching the light. Don't need to worry too much about the ferry boats. And then the water. Actually, I've got a little bit of a trough for me here. The paper is buckling a tiny bit, and where it's buckling, it's the water's accumulating. Then it's taking a longer time to dry. Over on the left-hand side, this is actually getting a little bit drier over here. So the same color combination I did before. So cobalt blue, burnt sienna. Don't change the color. I find that if you change the color, that, you know, if you changed your blue or you change the brown, it's gonna go. You'll get some funny effects. It might create some blooms or look a little bit muddy or bleed just a little bit too much. So I'm just mixing here, and I could just do a little test on the edge of the paper. I'm just looking down. It's actually still quite damp there. The relative humidity where I am at the moment is about 50%. I know some of you where you are, I've had people saying to me, oh, it's 10%, it's 12%. The paint's going to dry far quicker there for you, which might help at this stage. That can be a hindrance or it could be a benefit. Let me just do a little test over here on the left-hand side. No, it's just a little bit too damp still. Cobalt blue, burnt sienna, a thicker mix, not too watery. Actually, let me use a bigger brush for this. Similar brush, but bigger. Dampen it first of all, pop it in the water, take off some excess moisture on my sponge, dip it in the water again, excess moisture off on the sponge, and then just really pick up that same combination, but going darker, a bit more intense with the pigment, with the paint to water ratio. Okay, keep mixing that top corner. A little bit of burnt sienna. And looking again at the photograph, look at these sort of wave marks. We want to try and get the contour of these waves, imply that with these darker, these sort of elliptical shapes of these darker waves, and not too hard an edge as well. So keep mixing. Maybe some of these darker waves will come up against some of the lighter areas. So as I go up, I need to make these lines a little bit thinner. and continue them over the edge of the paper as well. Not too many of these marks, don't overdo it. This middle area here is still too wet for me, but it's drier up here, so I can go in with some, actually I'll change brush. I can go in with some really fine lines up here. Just describe just a few of these. Just a few like that. Do you see the marks I'm making with this brush? Just tapping the surface ever so lightly and creating that sort of elliptical shape. There's a little bit of a darker area going in just below that ferry boat there. A little bit of darkness in here. I guess the light may be more up that way, and so the water is a tiny bit darker on the left hand side. Let's just add in that slither of dark. Darkness over there on that side. Cobalt blue, burnt sienna, tiny bit of water, just ever so slight amount of water. I think I'm nearly done on the sea now. Still wet here. It's quite shiny when I'm looking at it against the light. Doesn't matter. We'll just crack on with the bits that are dry. Got a little bit of moisture there at the bottom of my well. Just pick up a tiny bit of that. Keep mixing. Make sure it's well and truly mixed. You don't want it sort of splitting as you touch the paper. Continue. So start on the masking tape and there. So a little bit darker down here. Down towards the foreground and maybe a few fine lines as well. Alternate the thickness of these lines, just a few fine ones there. Not too much detail though down in the foreground area. Okay, I'm just touching the top now because that's going to be my next stage in the painting. The buildings. There we go. That's enough. It sort of looks water-like. It sort of looks like there's a bit of movement, and we're just starting to get that shimmering appearing, and we'll try and enhance that with some white paint as a very last step. Right. Are there any questions? Okay. questions. There's one question. Let me just answer that first of all. Jensen, in general, what to make you decide using burnt umber and burnt sienna? I just find, well, the combination I find of for me, the cobalt blue and the burnt sienna, I found that actually gives me a softer, when I go in with these softer waves here, these darker, softer waves, I find that is a better combination for me rather than, say, ultramarine blue. So I've tried mixing different blues with different browns to get the sea color. And also then when the sea is drying, adding in those darker waves to get soft, darker waves. For me, I've just found the combination of cobalt blue and burnt sienna for the type of paints I use is best for me. Let's just, don't want to put too much in the distance as well. Not too much detail there, not too much detail down here. Right, thanks so much, Jensen. Okay, right, background buildings. Another tricky one here, particularly with the dome, and that's why it's important to get the drawing right first of all. But then as we come down, remembering to leave little horizontal lines or triangles where the light is hitting some of these buildings. Not too much of those lines, not too few. So just the right amount. Again, we need to observe the picture, and as we come down, we're just exposing these thin little horizontal bits of light, catching those buildings. Don't worry too much about the color here. It's mainly a darker value. I mean, it's so dark, the background buildings, and maybe a little bit of blue in there as well. That might help just move things back a bit and give us some cool shadows and a nice bit of contrast against the warms. So I'm going to use the same brush here that I had before. Let's just mix up a little bit of ultramarine blue, a bit of burnt sienna here. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and keep mixing. So concentrate on this. Make sure, because this might still be wet, make sure I'm not smudging anything with the palm of my hand, and also make sure this top bit is dry as well. So hopefully that looks fairly symmetrical. And then as we come down, we're just, and we can enhance that with a little bit of white paint later on, but we are coming down. And just now maybe alter the strength and the ratio of the brown to the blue as we come down. Maybe there's a building or two there. On the skyline, we've got some trees as well. Don't mix a green, just keep it that same color. that same color combination. There's another dome here. Lots of domes, lovely architecture here, and below the domes there's some horizontal structures catching the light. There's a few bits of roofs catching the light over there. Then there's some more trees. With some of these rooftops, maybe have a few of them at an angle like that. And make sure your paint is quite wet. Right, let's do a triangle there. In some places, you could add in a bit more water into the mix just to give you some lighter areas where there might be some smoke coming up or something like that, just to alter the values a little bit. Right, I've got a triangle there. And then continue over to the right-hand side. There's a building, and then there's some horizontals on that side. I'm not sure if it's the back of the ferry that's just sort of disappearing off to the right. But anyway, oops, I've gone over my triangle. So if I spot it in time, reach out for the paper towel and we'll strengthen that up later on. And while this is still damp, you can go up there and add in a little bit of clear water just to give you a bit of lighter area, or go in with some darker pigment just to make it a little bit more intense. Now, down to the top of this ferry here, let's have a straight edge. And then a little bit of a gap in there. And up to the next ferry boat Again, let's have a straight edge on that one, and then come down to the water's edge. I actually go a little bit darker towards the water's edge, pick up a bit of neutral tint, and the water's edge is quite dark, a bit of a contrast with the blue. Again, I can have a little bit of a jagged edge to it, not perfectly straight. So let's finish over on the left-hand side, down the front of the other boat. And then quite dark as we come up to the bow of the ferry. Now, as this is drying, I can just close up. If I've got too many of these lighter areas, I can just close up some of them. I can pick up a little bit of clear water as well. In fact, there's a bit of a bead forming there, so just pick that up with a drier brush. Don't want too much of a bead forming there and there as well. Pick up that, get in that harder edge there. Pick up a bit of cobalt blue in a few places and just dot it in where there could be some cool shadows. Maybe an odd structure, vertical spike or minaret appearing. Now, the minarets on the right-hand side. Fairly small synthetic brush and pick up something fairly dark. So ultramarine blue, bit of neutral tint, a little bit of burnt sienna. And then, because I'm right-handed, let me get in the left-hand one first of all. And there's three little stages to it. So there's one about there, and then one about there, and then maybe one about there. Then the taller one. So immediately it looks a little bit more like the Istanbul skyline. Three, then these two distant ones. One, two, and again the little platform stages to those towers. There. So with this brush, I can just dot in a bit of water here and there. See if I get a slight variation in the a bit of lightness appearing in some of the shadows. That's all right. So now just make sure my sea is drying nicely. Now for these ferry boats. So I'm going to paint them. Let's just consult the photo. They're like a sort of dark blue. And then we've got these darker horizontal bands where you've got the different levels of the boats. So let's go in with maybe a cerulean blue. Actually, I'm going to use my bigger brush. I think that's too small, that one. So let's just use my bigger synthetic brush and a bit of cerulean. Maybe a bit of cobalt if I don't think the blue is looking right. And it's got to be darker than the sea, but maybe not as dark as the background, if you see what I mean. So let's go. And if you want to make it a bit darker, add in a bit of burnt sienna, maybe a tiny bit of alizarin crimson as well. And then not too much paint on the brush. Check my edge there. Check I've got a good edge, a good point to it. I think that's all right. And then just paint in up to the top there. So we've got that thin slice of the top deck just exposing itself, and then come down. Down to the water's edge. Check my edge. Now, as I come down to the water's edge, I'm going to use a smaller brush and pick up a bit of neutral tint for the waterline of the boat. And it's not going to be a completely straight line, just again because the choppy water. We're going a bit darker on top of that. Now the other boats. So we've got a couple here. And then back to my small brush. And the choppy water, we've got a bit of a jagged edge to the waterline over there. The quay side. again, fairly jagged. And then over to the last boat. Bit of light hitting the top, perhaps a bit of light hitting the back as well. Thinking about the direction of the sun down to the water's edge. There. Just do a bit of fine tuning on that water line with a smaller brush. There we are. When that's dry, we'll put in some darker lines. Now, as the top buildings are drying, we can add in a bit of darkness. Now, not too dark, but a bit more detail to some of these buildings. We can get into some windows. That's too wet there. But just now and again, just adding a few little dots, little marks, just to indicate some windows. Two columns either side of the mosque. I can't really see with the photograph the exact detail of the mosque. There's quite a few horizontals as well. It's actually a little bit too wet, some of this background buildings. So I think I'm going to get the hairdryer out just to speed things up a little bit. Right, just excuse me while I get my hairdryer out. Let's just make that. Right, hairdryer. Excuse the noise, everyone. It's just to dry that area there. Okay. Okay, that's drier. So darker marked windows, the darker bands on the ferry, the ferry boat. I'll go back to this bigger brush here, and neutral tint, bit of alizarin crimson, just something fairly dark but not black. Ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, neutral tint. Make sure it's not too dry. And that's that is too dry. Bit more water, there's a bit more water there. Get these bands on the ferry boat. There. That looks a little bit more convincing as a ferry boat. And then this one here. Windows. Let's have some windows with smaller brush. Smaller one. Neutral tint. Don't want to overdo it with this. Just the impression of all of those really quite complex buildings over there. We can just sort of make out the various rooftops and roof shapes. Now, I might just, got to be careful here, I might just dab in some reds or some greens in the shoreline just to sort of, I think it looks quite boring, just here and there. Might be something else on the far shoreline, maybe a yellow as well. Just a tiny bit of yellow on that far side. But not too much. All right, now maybe make some of these rooftops just a little bit, some of them a bit of a softer edge to them. There. Okay, nearly there. White little splodges. You see these sort of circular, as I said earlier, they're like car headlights facing you. Now, what brush for this? Let's just keep with this smaller brush. I need to make sure this is very clean. I don't want to dirty up my white paint. I'm using white gouache here, permanent white gouache, all right? And I want to try and put in these little circular blobs as they appear here and there on the water. So not too much water on the brush. Picking it straight out of the tube. And we're just emphasizing some of the little marks and the sort of trails that some of these boats are making. This will take a few minutes to do. There are some of these larger marks here. Let's put one in the middle here. Circular marks. And then just a few little dots, but bigger, larger, more connected as we come into the main areas there. Perhaps just a few little sparkles in the distance. A few little dots in here. There we go, not too many. I think I've got the main ones in there. Now we could just as we got this white paint, we could just emphasize some of the light hitting the top of this dome. Notice a bit of light there, bit of light there on the right hand side. Just a few more intense bits of light hitting buildings or structures on top of the rooftops. There's the quayside there. Quayside there. Front of that ferry. Well, there's more I could do to it, but you've got to, at some stage, call it a day. Getting carried away now with white paint. When to stop? There we go. Do we have a feeling of light? Hopefully we do. Right, that's it, me done. So there we are. Istanbul, the Golden Horn, looking across the water to a busy ferry station, the Süleymaniye Mosque. Oh, I need to put a little bit of a spike on the top of the mosque. make sure it's in the middle. There we are, the Süleymaniye Mosque. Then coming down, light hitting the tops of the buildings. We've got a number of ferry boats here, jostling for position and coming and going, and then trying to get the effect of that sparkling water. And I'd love to see your different interpretations and your different techniques on how to do that. This was my way of doing it. All right. And we discussed those 3 ways of potentially doing that sparkling water. So I'd love to see your different ways of doing that. So watch out on Patreon, my fellow Patreon friends. The normal procedure for submitting your efforts to me, if you're on the relevant tier to get a critique from me, whether it's a text critique or a video critique, just look at the posting for clarification on the procedure. They're dead simple, so simple. Good luck with your painting. Let me just check if there's any more questions. Does anyone have any more questions at all? I see Francois is gonna watch the replay. Yeah, good. I mean, I would say just watch the replay, and I'll watch the replay myself, and see if you then attempt it. All right, and after seeing the recording, right? Okay. Well, I will. If there's no questions, I will wish everyone goodbye for now, and we will catch up with you on the next one. So I'm going to really look forward to seeing your paintings, everyone. Thanks very much. And as it's near the weekend, have a nice weekend. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.